The metal cuffs bit into my wrists as Sheriff Sheila leaned in close, her breath hot against my ear. My daughter watched from our porch, tears streaming down her 7-year-old face. This was not supposed to happen. Not in this town. Not over a mailbox. "You think you can fight me?" Sheriff Sheila whispered, her badge catching the morning sun. "I am the law in Warren County." The deputy pushed my head down as they forced me into the cruiser. Through the window, I could see my neighbors watching, faces half hidden behind curtains. Nobody moved to help. Nobody dared. My crime? Standing my ground when Sheriff Sheila decided my perfectly legal mailbox violated some obscure ordinance she could not even cite. But this was never about regulations or safety or visibility lines. This was about power. Her power. What Sheriff Sheila did not know that morning, as she smirked and slammed the cruiser door, was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her career. My mailbox was gone, but so was her badge's protection. Hash. All I wanted was stillness. The kind that wraps around you in the early morning when fog hangs low over untouched fields. After 15 years suffocating in Chicago's endless noise, I craved that silence more than oxygen itself. The listing for the old Whitman property in Harper's Mill appeared on my screen like an answer to an unspoken prayer. 2 acres, a weathered Victorian farmhouse, and not a single neighbor visible from the front porch. "It needs work," the realtor warned when I first viewed the property. "Peeling paint, sagging steps, windows that rattled when the wind blew hard from the west." "Perfect," I replied. That was 18 months ago. Every weekend since then had been devoted to resurrection. I replaced rotted boards on the wraparound porch, sanded floors worn by a century of footsteps, rewired electrical systems that predated modern safety codes. The house gave back its secrets slowly. Old letters tucked between floor joists, a child's marble hidden in the attic insulation, faded pencil marks on a bedroom doorframe tracking some long-forgotten child's growth. By spring, only one project remained. The dented metal mailbox at the end of the gravel drive leaned precariously on its weathered post, rusted through in spots where rain had collected across decades. "You could just get a standard one from the hardware store," Martin suggested. He owned the general store in town and had become something of a friend during my restoration journey. "No," I said, "this place deserves better." I designed the mailbox myself, heavy-gauge steel, powder-coated navy blue, with the house number cut into the side and backlit by a small solar panel. It took 3 weekends to fabricate in my makeshift workshop. The concrete footing extended 3 feet into the ground, far deeper than necessary, but I built things to last. When I mounted it at the prescribed 41 inches above road level, exactly where the old one had stood for decades, I stood back and felt a sense of completion wash over me. The mailbox stood as testament to my new life here, solid, purposeful, built with care. The townspeople of Harper's Mill had proven to be exactly what I hoped for when I fled the city. They nodded when we passed on Main Street, asked genuine questions about the renovation, left me alone when I needed solitude. Mrs. Harmon from the bakery occasionally left fresh sourdough in the old box before I replaced it. Tom Wilson, whose farm bordered my property to the east, helped me haul away 3 truckloads of debris without being asked. It was community without intrusion. Perfect balance. Until the morning, I walked down my drive to collect the mail and found a red notice taped across the front of my new mailbox. The paper fluttered in the breeze, held by bright red tape that left adhesive residue on the pristine painted surface. "Notice of violation," the header read in bold black letters. "Non-compliant roadside structure. Removal required within 72 hours or penalties will apply." I peeled the paper free, careful not to scratch the paint underneath. There was no mention of which specific regulation had been violated, no reference to any municipal code, just a threat of consequences and enforcement. At the bottom, where I expected to see a post office stamp or county zoning signature, was something else entirely. Sheriff Sheila Dawson, Warren County Sheriff's Department. A name I had never heard, a department I had never interacted with. This must be a mistake, I said aloud to the empty road. Why would a sheriff care about mailbox regulations? That was postal service territory, or perhaps county planning at most. I folded the notice carefully and walked back up my drive, the peaceful feeling I had cultivated for months suddenly disturbed. Something about the official nature of the warning, combined with the vagueness of the violation, sat uneasily in my stomach. That evening, I called Martin at the general store. "Sheriff Dawson left you a notice." His voice changed when I mentioned her name. There was a pause before he continued. "Listen about that mailbox. Maybe just move it back a few feet, or replace it with something simpler." "But why? It is perfectly legal. I checked postal regulations before I installed it." Another pause, longer this time. "Some advice, friend to friend," Martin finally said, his voice lowered as though someone might be listening. "Sheriff Sheila has her own way of reading the rules around here. Best not to give her reasons to notice you." I thanked him and hung up, but sleep evaded me that night. My gaze kept returning to the red notice on my kitchen counter. That was my first introduction to Sheriff Sheila Dawson. It would not be the last. The Harper's Mill Sheriff's Department occupied a squat brick building on Maple Street, 2 blocks from the town square. American flags flanked the entrance, and a row of well-maintained cruisers sat in designated spaces, each washed and gleaming despite the dusty country roads they patrolled. I entered at precisely 9:15 the next morning, notice in hand, determined to clear up what had to be a misunderstanding. The front desk deputy, young, crew cut, with a nameplate reading Deputy Carson, looked up from his computer. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I need to speak with Sheriff Dawson about this." I placed the notice on the counter between us. His eyes flicked to the paper, then back to me. Something in his expression shifted, a slight tightening around the eyes. "Do you have an appointment?" he asked, though we both knew the answer. "No, but this seems like a simple matter to resolve. My mailbox meets all federal postal regulations." Deputy Carson picked up his desk phone and pressed a button. "Sheriff, there is someone here about a compliance notice." He listened for a moment, then hung up. "She will see you. Down the hall, last door on the right." The hallway was lined with framed photographs. Sheriff Dawson at community events, accepting awards, standing alongside state politicians. In every image, she wore the same expression, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Sheriff Sheila Dawson did not rise when I entered her office. She remained seated behind an imposing oak desk, reviewing papers as though I was not there. She was in her 50s, with auburn hair cut in a severe bob that framed a face that might have been attractive if not for the hardness around her mouth. Her uniform was pressed to military precision. "Sir, down," she said, after letting me stand for an uncomfortable 30 seconds. It was not an invitation, but a command. I took the chair across from her and placed the notice on her desk. "I received this yesterday. There seems to be some confusion about my mailbox." Sheriff Dawson finally looked up, studying me with cold efficiency. "No confusion. Your structure violates county visibility regulations, creates a hazard for drivers approaching that curve." "What regulation specifically?" I asked. I reviewed postal guidelines carefully before installation. My mailbox is the proper height, proper distance from the road, and made of materials that exceed safety requirements. This is not about postal regulations. She leaned back in her chair. This is about County Ordinance 15J line of sight restrictions for roadside structures. Could I see a copy of that ordinance? Something flickered across her face, annoyance perhaps or surprise that I would ask. The county clerk can provide that if you file a proper request, she replied. My job is enforcement, not education. But how can I comply if I do not know the specific requirements? Simple, remove the structure and replace it with a standard mailbox. I recommend the ones at Wilson's Hardware. Tom stocks county-approved models. The conversation was beginning to feel less like clarification and more like a power play. Sheriff Dawson, with all due respect, I believe my mailbox is fully compliant with all relevant regulations. If there is a specific measurement or feature that needs adjustment, I am happy to modify it. But I need to know exactly what the issue is. She folded her hands on the desk. The issue is compliance. You have 72 hours from notice posting. That gives you, she glanced at her watch, approximately 48 hours remaining. And if I request documentation of the specific violation, then you can explain to the judge why you failed to comply with a lawful order while waiting for paperwork. She stood up, indicating our meeting was over. This is not the city, Mr. Reynolds. We keep things orderly here in Harper's Mill. I left the sheriff's office with more questions than answers. On the sidewalk outside, I paused to collect my thoughts when an older man approached me. He had watched me exit the building, and now he spoke in a low, urgent tone. Word of advice, son. Whatever she wants you to do, just do it. Sheila does not forget and she does not forgive. But this is about a mailbox, I said. It is perfectly legal. He shook his head slowly. Not about the mailbox, never is. Jim Colton put up fence posts last year. She said they were too tall, he argued. 3 weeks later, his son got pulled over 5 times in 1 month. Bicycle shop nearly went under after she started ticketing his customers for improper parking. Just be smart. Before I could respond, he walked away, looking nervously over his shoulder. That afternoon, I called the postal inspector in the neighboring county. After explaining my situation, he sounded confused. Sheriff's Department has no jurisdiction over mailbox regulations unless they create an actual traffic hazard, he explained. And from what you are describing, yours sounds well within guidelines. Could you email me the exact regulations? I asked. That night, measuring tape in hand and printout of guidelines beside me, I verified every dimension of my mailbox installation. Height, 41 inches above road level, perfect. Distance from road edge, 8 inches from curb to front of box, exactly as specified. Construction, heavy gauge steel with reflective numbers, exceeding minimum requirements. My mailbox was not the problem. Sheriff Sheila Dawson was. The workday had been long, a series of video conferences with Chicago clients who still valued my consulting despite my rural relocation. I pulled into my driveway at 6:30, mind still processing project timelines and budget forecasts. It took a moment for the absence to register. My mailbox was gone, not damaged or knocked askew by a careless driver. Gone. In its place was only a jagged concrete edge where the secure footing had been forcibly removed from the ground. Around it, tire tracks and boot prints marred the soft shoulder. I stood at the road's edge, stunned into silence. An elderly neighbor walking her dog paused nearby. They came in a county truck, Mrs. Patterson said quietly. 2 deputies. Used a chain to pull it straight out of the ground. Never seen anything like it. When, I managed to ask. Around noon. I was walking Buster here, same as now. Thought about taking a picture with my phone, but she trailed off, eyes darting nervously down the road. Seemed safer not to. I thanked her and walked slowly back to my house, anger building with each step. The security camera I had installed above my garage should have captured the road. I had not thought I would need such things in Harper's Mill, but old city habits die hard. The footage was clear despite the distance. A county maintenance truck with the sheriff's department logo on the door. 2 uniformed deputies. No paperwork presented, no knocking on my door. They simply attached a heavy chain, hooked it to their truck, and accelerated. My carefully crafted mailbox resisted at first, then surrendered with a violent lurch that sent one deputy stumbling backward. They loaded the twisted metal and concrete base into their truck bed and drove away. The entire operation took less than 10 minutes. I downloaded the video to my phone and drove directly to the sheriff's department. This time, Deputy Carson did not ask if I had an appointment. "Sheriff is not available," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Then where is my property?" I demanded, louder than intended. Another deputy looked up from across the room. "Sir, I need you to lower your voice," Carson said, hand drifting to his belt in what seemed like practiced intimidation. My mailbox was removed from my property today without notice, without documentation, and without legal authority. I want it returned immediately. The side door opened and Sheriff Dawson emerged, coffee cup in hand. She saw me and paused, then approached with deliberate slowness. "Mr. Reynolds, still having trouble understanding how things work here." I held up my phone, showing a freeze frame of her deputies removing my mailbox. "This is theft and destruction of private property. Your deputies removed my legally installed mailbox without presenting any documentation or legal order." She glanced at the image without interest. "That was a public hazard removal, conducted according to Ordinance 15J after you failed to comply with a lawful order. I believe we discussed this yesterday." I reviewed every applicable regulation. My mailbox violated nothing. "That is your opinion. My department made a different determination." She sipped her coffee. "If you wish to file a complaint, Deputy Carson can provide the appropriate form." Where is my mailbox now? Something that might have been amusement flickered across her face. "County impound lot. Behind this building. There is a recovery fee of $200 plus $50 per day storage. Cash only." I stared at her in disbelief. "You cannot be serious." "Completely serious, Mr. Reynolds. Though given the condition of the item after extraction, you might prefer to purchase a new, compliant mailbox from Wilson's Hardware." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and the concrete footing you poured extends into county right-of-way. That is another violation. The citation will be delivered tomorrow." After she left, Deputy Carson silently slid a complaint form across the counter. I took it and drove around to the back of the building. There, tossed carelessly near a dumpster, was my mailbox, bent, scratched, the solar panel shattered. The concrete base had cracked during the forcible removal. I photographed it from multiple angles, then returned to my car and completed the complaint form with precise, controlled handwriting despite my shaking hands. I detailed the events, cited the regulations, noted the video evidence, and requested disciplinary action against Sheriff Dawson for abuse of authority. When I returned to the front desk, a different deputy was on duty. He took the form, glanced at it, and dropped it into a tray without comment. "You will need a case number for reference," I said. Form will be processed according to department procedure, he replied flatly. Could take 2 to 3 weeks for initial review. I would like a receipt showing I filed the complaint today. He looked at me for a long moment, then stamped the duplicate copy and handed it back without a word. As I drove home, the sheriff's warning about a citation for the concrete footing echoed in my mind. This was escalating from harassment to something more systemic, something more personal. That night, I called an old colleague from Chicago, now a partner at a civil rights law firm. "Rebecca," I said when she answered, "I need your help. I am dealing with a sheriff who seems to think the law is whatever she decides it is that day." After listening to my story, her response was immediate. "Document everything. Do not engage directly anymore. And Michael, be careful. Small-town power structures can be more dangerous than big city ones. Fewer witnesses, fewer checks and balances." I glanced out my window at the empty space where my mailbox had stood that morning. "Too late for careful," I replied, "but not too late for justice." Hash. The Harper's Mill Public Library occupied a Victorian building on the east side of Town Square. The head librarian, Mrs. Henderson, had helped me research the history of my house during the renovation. Now, I sought her assistance with a different kind of historical research. "County Board minutes," she repeated when I made my request. "How far back do you need to go?" 5 years at least. I am looking for mentions of Sheriff Dawson, code enforcement actions, and any citizen complaints." She adjusted her glasses and gave me a measured look. "This would not have anything to do with what happened to your mailbox, would it?" "News traveled fast in Harper's Mill," I nodded. "You are not the first," she said quietly, guiding me to a back room where bound volumes of public records were stored. "Sheriff Sheila has her methods." For 3 days, I divided my time between remote work and research. The pattern emerged slowly from the dry language of official minutes. Complaints about Sheriff Dawson's aggressive code enforcement appeared repeatedly, though always couched in careful terms. Each time, the matter was referred to appropriate channels and disappeared from the record. More telling were the local newspaper archives, which Mrs. Henderson provided without my asking. The Harper's Mill Gazette's police blotter column told the real story between the lines. Citations for non-compliant structures appeared regularly, always targeting newcomers to town or those who had publicly disagreed with the sheriff or her allies on the county board. On day 4 of my research, Mrs. Henderson placed a slip of paper beside my laptop. "Eugene Parker," it read, with an address in the neighboring town of Clarksdale. "Retired postal worker. He might have insights about mailboxes." I found Eugene Parker tending tomato plants behind a modest bungalow. He was in his 70s, with the wiry strength of a man who had walked mail routes for decades. "Sheriff Sheila took your box?" he asked after I explained my situation. He shook his head. Not surprised at all." We sat on his back porch while he outlined what he knew. Sheriff Dawson had begun enforcing her version of mailbox compliance approximately 3 years ago. Always the same pattern: vague notice, refusal to cite specific violations, removal without warning. "Started with the Hernandez family on County Road 8, Eugene explained. Beautiful hand-painted mailbox, traditional Mexican designs. Sheila claimed it was distracting to drivers. Then there was Dr. Wilson, that custom cedar one he built. Mrs. Thompson's oversized box for her mail-order business. Old Mr. Jenkins with his tractor-shaped box." "Did anyone fight back?" I asked. "Jenkins tried, filed complaints, called state police, but Sheila's brother-in-law sits on the county commission. Complaints disappeared. Eventually, Jenkins got tired of being pulled over every time he drove to church. Eugene sipped his lemonade. Most folks just give up, buy the standard box from Wilson's Hardware. Interesting that Wilson's is the only place that sells approved mailboxes, I noted. Eugene's eyebrows raised. You notice that connection. Sheriff's cousin owns 40% of that store. Not public knowledge, but those of us who have been around know. Before I left, Eugene provided one more crucial piece of information. Sheriff has no jurisdiction over mailboxes at all. Postal regulations are federal. County has limited right-of-way authority, but enforcement belongs to zoning board, not sheriff. She has been operating completely outside her authority. Armed with this knowledge, I began locating other victims. Most were reluctant to speak at first, but each story followed the same pattern. Mrs. Thompson, whose home business depended on mail orders, had lost nearly a week of shipments when her mailbox disappeared. The Hernandez family had simply replaced their handcrafted box with a standard one after their teenage son started getting pulled over for tail light inspections. Dr. Wilson had filed a complaint that mysteriously vanished from county records. 5 cases in 3 years. 5 individuals who backed down rather than face escalating harassment. 5 examples of unchecked abuse of power. I compiled everything: photographs, witness statements, public records, Eugene's testimony about postal authority, into a comprehensive dossier. Then I sent it to Rebecca in Chicago with a simple question: do we have a case? Her response came the next morning, a video call request. Michael, she said when her face appeared on my screen. Her expression was serious, but animated with a familiar intensity I recognized from our days working together. This is not just a case. This is a federal civil rights violation. Sheriff Dawson has been conducting illegal seizures under color of law. The pattern adds up to systematic abuse of authority. So we can fight this. Absolutely. I have already contacted Eliza Washington at the Civil Liberties Union. She specializes in rural law enforcement overreach. We are building the foundation for a lawsuit that will make Sheriff Sheila wish she had never seen a mailbox in her life. For the first time since the red notice appeared on my mailbox, I felt something beyond anger. I felt hope. How do we proceed? I asked. Carefully, Rebecca replied. Document everything. Set up more cameras. Back up your footage to secure cloud storage. And Michael, be prepared for escalation. Sheriff Dawson will not surrender her authority without a fight. That warning proved prophetic sooner than either of us expected. 6 days after my mailbox disappeared, I found another notice taped to my front door. This one cited improper storage of waste materials and derelict equipment visible from public right-of-way. The violation: 3 terracotta planters waiting to be filled with autumn flowers and a wheelbarrow I had used for garden work the previous day, both sitting on my own porch. I photographed the notice, then carefully removed it without damaging the paper. Rebecca had been clear: preserve all evidence, every document, every interaction. That evening, as darkness settled over the countryside, a sharp knocking jolted me from my reading. 3 hard raps that echoed through the house, not the polite tapping of a neighbor, but the authoritative demand of someone with a badge. Through the security peephole, I saw Deputy Carson on my porch, hand resting casually on his holster. It was 9:45 at night, far too late for official business that could not wait until morning. I opened the door but remained behind the threshold. The camera above the door frame recorded silently. "Can I help you, Deputy?" "Just following up on a complaint about your property," he said, his tone artificially casual. Mind if I come in to discuss it? I would prefer to handle any matters during normal business hours, I replied, and I would like my attorney present for any discussions about alleged violations. Something hardened in his expression. Attorneys, that is how you city people handle simple matters. Is there an emergency that requires immediate attention, Deputy Carson? No emergency. Just making sure you understand the importance of compliance with local ordinances. I understand perfectly. Good night, Deputy. I closed the door firmly and watched through the window as he lingered on my porch for an uncomfortably long time before finally returning to his cruiser. He sat there, engine running, headlights illuminating my house for 20 more minutes before finally driving away. The message was clear. I was being watched, intimidated. Sheriff Sheila was escalating. The next morning, movement at the edge of my property caught my attention. A sheriff's department SUV was parked on the county road that bordered my land to the south. Through binoculars, I watched as Deputy Miller, Sheriff Dawson's most loyal officer, photographed my property with a long-lens camera. I stepped onto my deck in full view. He lowered the camera briefly, then continued photographing. No pretense of legitimacy. No attempt to hide what he was doing. Just open surveillance. My phone rang. Rebecca. We need to accelerate our timeline, she said without preamble. I just received a call from Eugene Parker. Sheriff's deputies cited him yesterday for an unauthorized structure in his backyard. The structure is a garden shed that has been there for 30 years. Retaliation, I said, watching Deputy Miller's vehicle finally pull away. Exactly, and it will get worse. We need to get ahead of this narrative before someone gets hurt. How quickly can you get me all the security footage you have? This afternoon. Good. Eliza Washington is prepared to file by the end of the week, but we need to create public pressure immediately. Sheriff Dawson needs to understand she has picked the wrong fight. After uploading all my documentation to Rebecca's secure server, I drove into town for supplies. The atmosphere had changed. People who had previously greeted me now avoided eye contact. At the grocery store, conversations hushed when I approached. Martin caught up with me in the parking lot. You have stirred up a hornet's nest, he said, looking around nervously to ensure no one overheard. Sheila has been asking questions about you, your background, your finances, why you moved here. Has she found anything to use against me? Not yet, but be careful. Councilwoman Diane Foster called me this morning. Off the record, she said Sheila crossed a line with your mailbox, said there have been too many incidents lately. Councilwoman Foster is willing to speak out. Martin shook his head. Not publicly, not yet, but she is not the only one who has grown tired of Sheila's methods. People are watching how this plays out. That evening I received a call from an unknown number. The voice was female, hushed and unfamiliar. Mr. Reynolds, this is Diane Foster. We have not met, but I am on the town council. I cannot be seen speaking with you, but you need to know something. Sheriff Dawson requested your property tax records today, and she asked the county clerk about permit history for your renovations. Looking for violations, I concluded. Yes, she is building a case, but she has gone too far this time, too visible, too many witnesses. She paused. Some of us are ready for change. We just needed someone brave enough to stand up first. After she hung up, I stood on my porch looking out at the darkness. The space where my mailbox had stood remained empty, a small patch of disturbed earth that had become symbolic of something much larger than a simple property dispute. This was about power unchecked, authority without accountability, and it was time to shine a light on both. Rebecca and Eliza moved with calculated precision. Once they had compiled enough evidence, the video footage, the falsified citations, the testimonies from past victims, they crafted a press release that was factual, measured, and devastating in its implications. No inflammatory language, no exaggerations, just the unvarnished truth about a sheriff who had weaponized her badge against ordinary citizens. "We need to control the narrative," Rebecca explained during our video call. "Once this goes public, Sheriff Dawson will attempt to paint you as an outsider stirring up trouble. We need the community on your side from the beginning." The press release went out on a Tuesday morning, accompanied by a curated selection of video clips showing the mailbox removal. By noon, the local Harper's Mill Gazette had published the story online. By 3, the regional news station from the county seat had dispatched a reporter. By 6, my phone was ringing with calls from journalists as far away as the state capitol. I sat at my kitchen table that evening, watching my story unfold on the evening news. The reporter stood at the edge of my property, gesturing to the empty space where my mailbox had stood. Behind me is the latest battleground in what appears to be a pattern of alleged abuse of power by Warren County Sheriff Sheila Dawson, she said into the camera. What began as a dispute over a mailbox has uncovered what multiple residents now describe as years of selective enforcement and intimidation tactics. The screen cut to Eugene Parker, his weathered face serious beneath the brim of his Postal Service cap. "There is no legal authority for a sheriff to regulate mailboxes," he stated firmly. "That is federal jurisdiction, plain and simple." Then came something unexpected, other victims stepping forward. Mrs. Thompson described how her business suffered when her oversized mailbox disappeared. The Hernandez family spoke about their hand-painted mailbox, torn from their property without warning. Dr. Wilson finally went on record about his cedar creation that Sheriff Dawson had deemed an eyesore. One by one, the silent victims found their voices. The dam had broken. My phone buzzed with a text from Martin. "Everyone at the diner is watching the news. People are talking, really talking." Sheriff Dawson released a statement the next morning. It was brief and carefully worded. "The Warren County Sheriff's Department enforces all ordinances without prejudice or targeting. Recent allegations misrepresent standard enforcement procedures. Any citizen with concerns about citations should follow proper administrative channels rather than making inflammatory public accusations." The statement only fueled more coverage. By midweek, the story had spread across social media platforms, with hashtags like Mailbox Justice and Sheriff Power Trip trending regionally. Opinion pieces appeared in the state newspaper questioning the oversight mechanisms for rural law enforcement. The turning point came Thursday evening. My doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Councilwoman Diane Foster standing on my porch. Her expression was tense but determined. "May I come in?" she asked, glancing nervously behind her. Once inside, she spoke in a low, urgent tone. "I should not be here. If Sheila finds out—" She paused, gathering her courage. "But someone needs to say it publicly. The council has enabled her for too long." "Are you willing to go on record?" I asked. She hesitated only briefly. "Yes, it is time. She has gone too far this time." The next morning, Councilwoman Foster appeared on the regional morning news. Her statement was measured but devastating. "While I cannot speak for the entire council, I believe Sheriff Dawson has exceeded her authority in multiple instances. The pattern of selective enforcement has created a climate of fear that has no place in our community. The council will be launching an independent review of all enforcement actions taken in the past 3 years." Sheriff Dawson's carefully constructed fortress of intimidation began to crumble. People who had previously avoided eye contact now nodded to me on the street. Emails arrived from residents I had never met, sharing their own stories of intimidation. "I painted my house blue last summer," one woman wrote. "Sheila cited me for using an unapproved color. I repainted it beige the next week. My son got pulled over 5 times in 1 month after I spoke at a council meeting against expanding the sheriff's budget," wrote another. Each story added fuel to the growing fire. Rebecca called with updates daily as more people came forward. "This is not just about your mailbox anymore," she said. "You have opened the floodgates. People are finding their courage." Late Friday afternoon, Martin appeared at my door with a small group of longtime residents. "We want you to know," he said, speaking for the group, "that not everyone was blind to what was happening. Some of us just did not know how to fight it, but we are with you now." An elderly woman stepped forward. "I have lived in Harper's Mill for 73 years. What Sheriff Sheila has done to this community is not who we are, not who we have ever been." As they left, Martin lingered behind. "There is talk that some of the deputies are questioning her orders now. The ground is shifting under her feet." That night, I stood at my window looking out at the darkened landscape of my adopted hometown. What had begun as a simple desire to protect my property had evolved into something much larger, a community finding its voice against tyranny. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Sheriff Sheila Dawson was on the defensive. And we were just getting started. The civil lawsuit against Sheriff Sheila Dawson and the Warren County Sheriff's Department contained 27 pages of meticulously documented allegations. The legal language was precise and devastating. Unlawful seizure of private property without due process. Pattern and practice of selective enforcement constituting harassment. Abuse of authority under color of law. Violation of First Amendment rights through retaliatory enforcement actions. Rebecca and Eliza had built a case that was both personal and sweeping. My mailbox at the center, surrounded by concentric circles of abuse that extended throughout Harper's Mill. Each allegation supported by video evidence, witness statements, or public records. "This filing will hit her from angles she cannot defend," Eliza explained during our final review. "The personal property claim is straightforward damages. The pattern of abuse opens the door to discovery of all her enforcement actions. The First Amendment claim prevents her from retaliating further." "What about the other victims?" I asked. "Once we establish the pattern with your case, they can file their own claims or join a class action. This is just the beginning." We filed on a Monday morning. Rebecca had coordinated with journalists to ensure maximum visibility. As the clerk stamped the documents, photographers captured the moment from the courthouse steps. By noon, the news had spread throughout the county. Sheriff Dawson would be formally served notice at her office the following day. I declined interview requests, following Rebecca's advice to let the legal documents speak for themselves. But I watched from across the street the next morning as a process server entered the sheriff's department, followed moments later by 2 news crews. Through the glass front doors, I could see the commotion inside. Sheriff Dawson emerged from her office, face flushed with anger as she was handed the lawsuit. She noticed the cameras and quickly composed herself, but the damage was done. The image of Sheriff Sheila Dawson being served with civil rights violation papers flashed across screens throughout the state that evening. The department's response came through their county attorney by the end of the week, a motion to dismiss claiming qualified immunity and denying all allegations. The filing was standard legal procedure, but notably thin on substantive defenses. More telling were the subtle shifts within the department itself. Deputy Carson called in sick 3 days in a row after the filing. 2 other deputies requested transfers to neighboring counties. During a mandatory department meeting, a source inside reported that multiple officers refused to make eye contact with the sheriff during her speech about standing united against false accusations. Her authority is eroding, Rebecca noted during our weekly update call. Law enforcement relies on chain of command. Once that starts cracking, it rarely recovers. Harper's Mill itself seemed to hold its collective breath. The coffee shop conversations hushed when I entered, not from fear as before, but from a new kind of respect, or perhaps curiosity about the man who had challenged their untouchable sheriff. Diane Foster called one evening with inside information. The county commissioners held an emergency closed session today. They are worried about liability. There is talk of settling quickly to avoid further exposure. Will they remove her? I asked. Not yet. Her supporters on the board are fighting back, but they are frightened. The insurance carrier is asking hard questions about oversight and past complaints. The court date was set for 3 months out, October 15th. Each passing day brought new developments. The state attorney general's office requested copies of all filings. A civil rights monitoring group announced they would send observers to the trial. 3 more deputies requested transfers. Most significantly, people began to speak openly against Sheriff Dawson for the first time. Letters to the editor filled the local paper. Citizens stood up during the public comment period at council meetings to share their stories. Sheriff Dawson's public appearances grew rare. When she did emerge, the confident swagger had diminished. She read prepared statements and declined questions. Her cruiser, once prominently parked in front of the department, now appeared in the back lot, away from public view. 2 weeks after filing, I received an unexpected visit from Deputy Miller, the officer who had photographed my property during the escalation phase. He arrived in civilian clothes, his personal vehicle parked discreetly down the road. 5 minutes of your time, he requested, standing stiffly on my porch. Off the record. Inside, he spoke in measured tones. Not everyone in the department supports what happened to you. Some of us have been uncomfortable with the direction things have been going for a long time. Why come forward now? I asked. Because the lawsuit discovery process will reveal things. Better to come clean voluntarily. He placed a thumb drive on my table. Departmental emails about your case. Internal discussions about targeting problem residents. You will get these eventually through legal channels, but time matters. After he left, I sent the drive immediately to Rebecca. Her call came within the hour. This is extraordinary, she said, voice tight with excitement. He has given us their entire internal communication strategy, their deliberate targeting policy, everything. Will it hold up in court? Absolutely. And more importantly, it signals that her own department is fracturing. The lawsuit has not even gone to trial, and already her power structure is collapsing. The countdown to our court date continued. Each day, the town watched and waited, a community holding its breath, wondering if justice would finally come to Harper's Mill. The Warren County Courthouse stood at the center of town, a stately brick building with white columns and broad steps that had witnessed a century and a half of local justice. On the morning of October 15th, those steps were crowded with journalists, observers, and citizens who had arrived hours early to secure seats inside. I entered through a side door with Rebecca and Eliza, their confident presence steadying my nerves. The courtroom itself was all polished wood and solemn dignity. As we took our seats at the plaintiff's table, Sheriff Dawson entered with her legal team, 3 county attorneys in dark suits. She wore her full dress uniform, badge gleaming, but the confident stride I remembered from her office was noticeably diminished. Judge Elena Martinez entered, her reputation for fairness and meticulous adherence to law preceding her. This court will now hear case number 2024 CV 1078, Reynolds versus Dawson et al. The opening statements established the battlefield. Rebecca presented me as an ordinary citizen whose property had been unlawfully seized by an official acting well beyond her authority. Sheriff Dawson's attorney portrayed her as a dedicated public servant, enforcing community standards against newcomers who refused to comply with local ordinances. The video evidence came first, the stark footage of deputies ripping my mailbox from the ground, the confrontation at the sheriff's office, the late-night intimidation attempt. Each clip was accompanied by precise documentation of dates, times, and applicable regulations. And what regulation, specifically, did Mr. Reynolds violate? Rebecca asked during her examination of Sheriff Dawson. County Ordinance 15J regarding roadside structures and visibility, Sheriff Dawson replied, her voice steady. Rebecca approached with a document. Your Honor, I would like to enter Exhibit 14 into evidence. This is the complete Warren County Ordinance Code, certified by the county clerk. The document was accepted, and Rebecca continued. Sheriff Dawson, could you please point to the section of Ordinance 15J that my client violated? Sheriff Dawson leafed through the pages, her confidence visibly wavering. Section 3, Paragraph 2 regarding line of sight. Please read that section aloud for the court. Sheriff Dawson found the page and began reading. Structures within the county right-of-way must not obstruct driver visibility at intersections or curves as determined by the County Transportation Department. And who in the Transportation Department determined that Mr. Reynolds' mailbox created such an obstruction? I made that determination based on my authority as sheriff. Does the ordinance grant you that authority? As sheriff, I am empowered to enforce all county ordinances. That was not my question. Does this specific ordinance grant you, rather than the Transportation Department, the authority to make visibility determinations? Sheriff Dawson's jaw tightened. No. Did you consult with the Transportation Department before ordering the removal of Mr. Reynolds' mailbox? That was not necessary given the obvious. Yes or no, Sheriff Dawson? Did you consult with them as required by the ordinance you just read aloud? No. Each exchange further eroded Sheriff Dawson's credibility. When Rebecca introduced the internal emails provided by Deputy Miller, showing the deliberate targeting of problem residents, Sheriff Dawson's composure began to crack. Who authorized you to create a watch list of citizens who had questioned your authority? Rebecca asked. That is a mischaracterization of standard department procedure, Sheriff Dawson shot back, her voice rising. Is it standard procedure to instruct deputies to find violations at specific properties? Is it standard procedure to write, and I quote from your email, make an example of the mailbox guy so others fall in line? Objection, the county attorney called out. Counsel is cherry-picking statements without context. The full email chain has been entered into evidence, Your Honor, Rebecca responded calmly. The court can read the complete context. Overruled, Judge Martinez stated. The witness will answer the question. Sheriff Dawson's composure cracked further. Sometimes firm enforcement is necessary to maintain community standards, even when that enforcement violates the very ordinances you claim to uphold, Rebecca pressed. I know what is best for this community, Sheriff Dawson snapped, her voice echoing through the courtroom. These people move in from the city and think they can ignore our ways. Judge Martinez's gavel cracked sharply. Sheriff Dawson, you will confine your answers to the questions asked. The testimony from other victims proved even more damaging. Mrs. Thompson described through tears how the loss of her business mailbox had cost her nearly $1,000 in delayed payments and undelivered products. The Hernandez family's teenage son testified about being pulled over 7 times in 1 month after his parents questioned the removal of their hand-painted mailbox. With each witness, Sheriff Dawson grew more agitated, frequently whispering urgently to her attorneys or shaking her head in visible disagreement. During Dr. Wilson's testimony about his cedar mailbox, she interrupted loudly. That thing was an eyesore. The whole neighborhood complained. Judge Martinez's gavel cracked again. Sheriff Dawson, that is your second warning. One more outburst and you will be held in contempt. The final day of the trial arrived with tension hanging thick in the courtroom. Even Sheriff Dawson's most loyal deputies sat stone-faced in the gallery, creating noticeable distance between themselves and their leader. As closing arguments concluded and the judge retired to consider her verdict, the entire town of Harper's Mill seemed to hold its breath, waiting for justice to speak. Judge Martinez required only 2 days to reach her decision. When court reconvened on that crisp October morning, the courtroom had never been more crowded. People stood along the walls, reporters filled the press section, and an unusual silence blanketed the room as the judge took her seat. In the matter of Reynolds versus Dawson, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed space, this court has carefully reviewed all evidence and testimony presented. She methodically outlined her findings on each count. The unlawful seizure claim was straightforward. Sheriff Dawson had removed private property without proper authority or due process. The harassment allegations were substantiated by the pattern of selective enforcement documented in the department's own records. The First Amendment violations were clear in the retaliatory actions taken against those who questioned her authority. Most troubling to this court, Judge Martinez continued, is the evidence of a systematic abuse of power by an official entrusted with protecting the very rights she violated. Sheriff Dawson repeatedly exceeded her lawful authority, weaponized her office against citizens, and demonstrated contempt for the legal limitations of her position. Sheriff Dawson sat rigid in her chair, eyes fixed forward, as the judge delivered her verdict. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. Sheriff Sheila Dawson and the Warren County Sheriff's Department are hereby ordered to pay compensatory damages in the amount of $75,000 for the unlawful seizure of property, emotional distress, and documented harassment. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, but the judge was not finished. Additionally, this court orders punitive damages in the amount of $150,000 to reflect the willful and egregious nature of these violations. Sheriff Dawson is further ordered to issue a public apology acknowledging these violations. The murmur grew louder. Finally, this court is referring this matter to the State Law Enforcement Standards Board for review of Sheriff Dawson's certification, and to the State Attorney General's office for consideration of criminal charges related to abuse of authority. Sheriff Dawson's attorney leaned in to whisper urgently in her ear, but she shook him off, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell with decisive finality. Outside the courthouse, sunlight spilled across the gathering crowd as reporters thrust microphones toward Rebecca and me on the steps. This verdict sends a clear message. Rebecca stated. No badge grants immunity from the law. No official stands above the Constitution. My client stood up not just for himself, but for every citizen who has faced abuse of power without recourse. When asked for comment, I kept my response brief. This was never about money or personal vendetta. It was about accountability. Today, the system worked as it should. Sheriff Dawson exited through a side door, avoiding the media entirely. The ripple effects began immediately. That afternoon, the county commission called an emergency session and voted 4-3 to suspend Sheriff Dawson pending the state investigations. Deputy Chief Morgan was appointed acting sheriff with a mandate to review all enforcement actions from the past 3 years. The community response transcended my expectations. That evening, the town hall meeting room overflowed with citizens who had come to hear the commission's public statement about the verdict. When Commissioner Foster announced Sheriff Dawson's suspension, spontaneous applause erupted, not in celebration of one person's downfall, but in relief at justice finally served. As the meeting concluded, Commissioner Foster asked me to say a few words. I had not prepared remarks, but as I approached the podium, the words came naturally. Sometimes the smallest battles reveal the largest truths about who we are, I began, looking out at faces both familiar and new. A mailbox seems trivial until it represents your right to be secure in your property and free from arbitrary power. What happened in Harper's Mill could happen anywhere when we stop questioning authority or standing up for each other. The room was perfectly still, every person listening intently. But what also happened here, neighbors finding courage, speaking truth, reclaiming their community, that too can happen anywhere. That is the Harper's Mill I chose to make my home, and that is the community I see before me tonight. The applause that followed felt like validation, not just of my stand, but of every person who had found the courage to speak up about their own experiences with Sheriff Dawson. As I left the town hall that night, Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor who had witnessed the mailbox removal, approached with tears in her eyes. "Young man," she said, taking my hand in hers, "I have lived in this town for 67 years. For the first time in the last decade, I am not afraid of who might be watching or listening. You gave us back our home." That night, I stood on my porch looking out at the stars above Harper's Mill. The empty space where my mailbox had stood now represented something more profound than its absence. It marked the spot where one person's stand against injustice had awakened a community's dormant courage. And in that moment, I understood that true peace comes not from avoiding conflict, but from standing firm when principles demand it. The first frost of November painted the field silver as neighbors gathered at the end of my driveway. Martin arrived with his truck bed loaded with concrete mix and tools. Dr. Wilson brought his teenage sons to help with the heavy lifting. The Hernandez family came bearing thermoses of hot chocolate and homemade tamales. Even Mrs. Thompson closed her shop for the morning to join us. We were rebuilding more than a mailbox. "I brought the post digger," Tom Wilson called as he unloaded equipment. "We will set this one even deeper than before." His son Daniel grinned. "Dad says we are building a mailbox bunker. Nothing short of a tank is pulling this one out." The design was collaborative, heavy-gauge steel like my original, but with modifications suggested by my neighbors. The Hernandez family had offered to paint it, incorporating elements that represented the spirit of Harper's Mill. The base would be reinforced concrete, extending far below the frost line. As we worked through the morning, more townspeople stopped by. Some stayed to help, others brought food or simply watched with approval. Deputy Chief Morgan, now officially acting Sheriff Morgan, even pulled his cruiser to the roadside and got out. "Just making sure everything is up to code," he said with a wink. "Looks regulation perfect to me." The gathering had evolved into an impromptu community event, a public reclaiming of the right to exist without fear. Children played in the yard while adults worked and talked, laughter flowing freely in a way I had not witnessed since moving to Harper's Mill. Sheriff Dawson's disgrace continued to unfold in the background of our lives. The state investigation expanded beyond my case, uncovering financial irregularities in the department's handling of seized property. 3 weeks after the verdict, she submitted her resignation rather than face a formal removal hearing. Her departing statement revealed her unchanged perspective. "I served this community with dedication, maintaining standards that preserved our way of life against outside influences. History will vindicate my methods." But Harper's Mill was already writing a different history. Under Acting Sheriff Morgan's leadership, the department began rebuilding community trust through transparency and accountability. Citations were issued with clear references to specific violations. Deputies received additional training on constitutional limitations of their authority. The mailbox installation took most of the day. Concrete needed to set, paint needed to dry, final adjustments needed to be made. As afternoon faded toward evening, we gathered around the finished product. The mailbox stood tall and proud at the proper height, its steel body painted a bold red with gold lettering. Along the sides, the Hernandez family had painted intricate designs incorporating symbols of community: wheat sheaves, oak leaves, flowing water. Martin produced a bottle of champagne and plastic cups. "A toast," he announced, pouring small measures for everyone. "To standing tall." "To standing tall," the group echoed, raising their cups toward the mailbox that had become a symbol of something far greater than its function. As the impromptu celebration wound down and people began departing, I found myself helping others file the initial paperwork for their own claims against the former sheriff's department. Mrs. Thompson needed guidance on documenting her business losses. Dr. Wilson had questions about the process for formal complaints. Even shy Mr. Jenkins, who had given up his tractor-shaped mailbox years ago, wanted to know if he too could seek redress. In the weeks that followed, I established regular hours at the community center, helping fellow citizens navigate the legal processes Sheriff Dawson had weaponized against them for so long. Each form filed, each complaint documented, each story recorded contributed to the community's healing, the systematic dismantling of a reign of petty tyranny. The special election for a permanent sheriff was scheduled for spring. 3 candidates announced their intention to run, each emphasizing transparency, accountability, and constitutional limitations on authority. The language of rights entered everyday conversation in Harper's Mill as citizens rediscovered their voice in local governance. On a clear December morning, I walked down my driveway to collect the mail from my restored mailbox. Max, the neighborhood dog, trotted alongside me as had become his habit. The brass flag gleamed in the winter sunlight as I lowered it and retrieved the day's correspondence. Returning to my porch, I settled into the rocking chair with a cup of steaming coffee, surveying the peaceful landscape that had drawn me to Harper's Mill in the first place. The same vista, the same quiet beauty, but now undergirded by something stronger than before. The peace I felt was deeper because it had been tested and defended. A red cardinal landed briefly atop my mailbox before continuing its flight. I watched it disappear into the distance, a flash of color against the winter sky. My mailbox stood firm in the morning light, not just a receptacle for letters, but a daily reminder that small stands against injustice could transform an entire community. Some battles chose you, And sometimes those were the ones most worth fighting.